I love the rainbow flag that flies in front of my house. Every time I come in or out of the house, I brush past the flag. When I sit in the house, I can see the colors waving through the glass on the front door. I recently had to replace the flag because it had worn out. It has been waving through heat and storms, wind and winters. It became tattered. So recently, it was time to refresh it. One morning, pre-COVID, I was out in front of the house. It was garbage pickup day, so I was moving the cans down to the street. Yes, you are right. I do have 3 very capable children, and yet Dad was the one doing this chore. And please note that this is exactly why we do not have a dog, despite every promise and reassurance about walking a dog. So I was at the end of the driveway, and a girl was walking to the school bus. I didn't know the girl, but clearly she lived in the neighborhood, and she said to me, "Rabbi, thank you for having the pride flag out. I walk by your house every morning, and it makes me feel that me and my friends will be okay." And she kept on walking. I don't know who she was. I don't know the burdens that she or her friends carry, but I do know that that flag is staying. We send so many messages to people, active ones, passive ones, intentional messages, unintentional messages. We communicate inclusion, and we subtly communicate otherness and unwelcome, and you're an outsider. We do this with loved ones and with strangers. We send these messages over time. And I hope that the messages of inclusion and caring and pride are the types of messages which this girl felt and were repeated and reinforced each time she walked by my house. I hope I could be a small part of her journey. And I hope she felt that at least one rabbi saw her and supported her, even without knowing her. Growing up in San Francisco, in the San Francisco area in the 1970s, being gay was not an oddity. Friends in high school, the Castro neighborhood of the city, family members. It was not an alternative lifestyle. It was just a lifestyle. The tragedy of AIDS shaped conversations in the 80s. And when I moved to DC in the late 80s, the AIDS quilt covered the National Mall. I tried to communicate a similar comfort or exposure or normalcy to my own children who were growing up right here in Bethesda. Their influences were different than mine, but I wanted them to know that their parents support and love them with any of these choices or realizations about themselves. Even when we might get friends' pronouns wrong or mixed up who they were dating, I made sure that we were not living in Laramie, Wyoming. It was just after my birthday a few years ago. I had received a bar set, and we had a few people over to experiment with different cocktails. And after the friends left, we were in the kitchen, and out of the blue, Ben says, "Fine, I will tell you something you already know." It came out of nowhere. It was clearly an emotion that was disconnected from whatever was happening in the kitchen as we were just cleaning up from a nice evening with friends over. Okay, I don't know what it is, but say away. He had clearly worked up to this revelatory moment. And he continued, "Fine, I'm gay." And to be honest, it was not something we had known or not known before. It didn't really matter. Our approach was embracing a family and of friends, gay, lesbian, straight, whatever. The gender of someone's partner was not how we defined our relationships with someone, and especially not our children. And this was a big moment. Of all the big thoughts which ran through my head, the one most pronounced was, if coming out was this hard for Ben, Growing up in the household which I have briefly described, I cannot imagine how hard it must be for people with different families. I felt like how I responded was going to be so important in that moment, to honor his courage, to celebrate this step of owning his own identity. I'm sure this was the moment filled with fear for him, because what were his parents actually going to say? This was no longer theoretical, but actually a real moment. He must have been scared of what might happen. He was coming out. Feeling the moment, I took a pause, and I responded, "Okay, but you still need to clear the table." And we laughed, and Rebecca and Ben and I talked late into the evening. I remember being tearful, realizing that he had been carrying this burden. Despite everything, feeling that Ben, despite all the things that he was feeling, for him to have a sense of hesitancy that this might be something that could break our family was painful to realize. And yet his fear was not unfounded. While it was incorrect for our family, there are countless stories about others where that moment of revelation turned in a much darker direction. I can only imagine the courage and struggle it took for Ben to tell us, and all the more so for others who hide themselves from their families or from themselves. Something about Ben adjusted after that. It felt he had laid down a burden. He was able to be more his authentic self, and it has been beautiful to watch. I asked Ben for permission to share this private family story, and the ease in which he said yes was another indication to me of his comfort in his own skin at this point in his life. I have a picture of Ben at a pride parade a few years ago, and the picture captures his new sense of freedom. I've always loved pride parades. They are festive and flamboyant and often shocking, especially in San Francisco. When I was in Israel 3 weeks ago, it happened to be Jerusalem LGBTQ+ Pride Parade. And while the city was draped with rainbow flags, we were not able to participate in any of the activities. We packed a lot into 57 hours on the ground, but even that has its limits. And I loved seeing the flags and people and preparations of Jerusalem embracing LGBTQ+ pride. And I wonder what those ancient stones would say if they could talk. Jerusalem, Ir HaKodesh, the holy city, it has seen it all. So what have those streets and walls witnessed over the millennia? It has seen correct interpretations and exploited interpretations of the Bible. Crusaders and Pharisees and Jews of all flavors and cults and rabbis and imams and priests and King David and Jesus and Persians and Romans and Babylonians. These stones have seen a lot. So I wonder what Leviticus 18:22 has meant to those different people in different times. Some probably saw the parade as a desecration of the city. I saw it as sanctifying Jerusalem. Pride Month is a relatively new experience. Let me share something from my friend and colleague, Rabbi Matthew Gerwitz. I think it's important that people remember and learn this history. It is part of the civil rights journey in America. And he wrote, "Pride does not have a history that goes back longer than 4 decades. It was first celebrated in 1970 as Christopher Street Liberation Day. It marked the first anniversary of the Stonewall Riots. The riots began on June 27th, 1969, when police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar on Christopher Street, and arrested the owners, employees, and many of its LGBTQ+ customers. Of course, that was not the first police raid of a gay bar in the city or the county or in the country. There had been many times that LGBTQ plus individuals were harassed by police, but until Stonewall, LGBTQ plus individuals had never fought back in any kind of consistent manner. In the 60s, many people were so afraid of the repercussions of coming out, so many of them were fearful of the effects of their coming out would have on their family members and their own employment, that many would not participate in political activities to promote their own rights. And generally, the LGBTQ plus community didn't march. It didn't demonstrate, almost never filed employment discrimination charges, or many used alias names in different worlds in which they felt they needed to operate. With Stonewall, all that began to change. The people who were arrested at the Stonewall in that day did indeed fight back. These people simply refused to go quietly into the paddy wagon, to be abused and hauled off to jail once again. And after that day, for many successive nights, people joined together on Christopher Street to protest the police raid. Their seemingly small yet raucous demonstrations came to be known as the Stonewall Riots. The Stonewall Riots rallied the gay community not only into political action, but also to a new level of respect for themselves. From that day in 1969, the moment has only evolved. In June of 1970, on the first anniversary of Stonewall, a few hundred people gathered in Sheridan Square to march to Central Park. And when the initial marchers arrived at the center of the park, they saw that their numbers had increased greatly to 3,000, and everyone there stopped and cheered and cried together. Since 1970, the battle has been complicated and difficult. It actually took 15 years to persuade the New York City Council to pass the Lesbian Gay Rights Bill. And of course, the annual Pride Parade is a significant and vital ritual. It is important that the LGBTQ plus community gets to celebrate their community and their rights. It also enables the community to lend each other the courage that is so needed to continue to press for the rights of all humans deserve, the rights that all humans deserve in this world. With all this history, the question, of course, stands: why is it important for all of us as a Jewish community to celebrate Pride Day? I think that there's a few reasons. The first is that we have skewed how we read the Torah. Too many people have allowed a single verse to stand above all the others and be manifested as intolerance. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. In the Tanakh, what else is an abomination, though? My point is, we have come to accept other acts of biblical abomination, yet hold on to the singular verse. We need to open our eyes wider. Cheating in business is an abomination, Deuteronomy 25. Adultery is an abomination, Ezekiel 16. Proverbs 6 says that anyone who lies or schemes commits an abomination. One who is haughty commits an abomination in Proverbs 16. Tray food is an abomination, Deuteronomy 14. It is time to open ourselves up to other ways of understanding these verses, to stop using the political agendas of others, to lay these verses next to the love and caring, which is also pervasive throughout the Tanakh and Jewish wisdom. And the second reason I think it's important we recognize Pride Month is because being gay or lesbian or trans or queer is not an issue happening out there elsewhere. It is not a theoretical issue happening someplace else. We are expressing our love and support of fellow Bethel members and families and children. We recently celebrated our first Simchat mitzvah. This was a non-binary child who did not want a bar bat mitzvah. We had long conversations, and it was a beautiful, meaningful day for the entire family and for the Chazan and I. And we've celebrated bar bat mitzvah for trans children as well. With some of these families, we studied the tshuvot of the conservative movement together regarding halakha and customs. My point is, how we respond is how we are building our own Bethel community. I know the best of Bethel is based in love and embrace and in tradition. And none of that is sacrificed in these moments. To the contrary, like Jerusalem draped in the rainbow flags, I think we are sanctifying ourselves and our community in these moments. So I don't know if Ben went to any Pride events up in Burlington where he lives, but I do know that as I left my house this morning to walk to shul, I looked at the flag flying in front of my doorway and I smiled. I kissed my mezuzah as the flag draped against my shoulder, and I could not be more proud. As a Jew, and as a rabbi, and as a dad. Shabbat shalom.